Welcome to Tech Startup Stories, hosted by Natalie Binns. This is the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the B2B startup world.
Hi, I'm Natalie Binns, and after many years as a marketing leader in the B2B SaaS industry, I set up Hey Gabby to support startups and scale-ups with their go-to-market and growth needs. I work with so many great founders, and that's led me to want to hear their stories and share them with others. And that's why I set up this podcast. So let's get into this week's podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's podcast. And this week, I'm getting to speak to Tom again from season 1, Tom Rudnai, from Demand Genius, who is one of the co-founders. And we spoke a year ago about all of the amazing things that you guys were doing. I really enjoyed that conversation. And if you haven't listened to it, do go back to episode 2 of season 1. But welcome back to the show, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. Nice to see you again, Natalie.
It's so great to have you back. And, you know, I had a huge amount of feedback from your podcast. Everybody really loved how real you were, how authentic you were, and some of the things that you came sort of to the podcast with and your insights. So I'm really keen to kind of hear what's happened over the last 12 months since we last spoke. But let's just very quickly recap on some of the things that you said in the last episode.
Next 12 to 18 months, hopefully a whole lot more customers starting to use Demand Genius. We're kind of at the stage now, we're on market. We know that we can get customers going pretty quickly and show them exactly how much revenue they're getting out of content and help them get more. So I think we're kind of ready to start investing a little bit more in scaling that from a functionality point of view and like where we see the product going. There's two things that we really want to do. One is make it really, really easy to use us. So at the moment, we can get you set up over the course of a 30, 50-minute call. We want that to be easy. You can do it on your own if you can do it on your own if you want to. We're here to help only if needed. The other element for us is the cool thing about content is it feeds every element of the marketing machine. So at the moment, we tell you what content's working in every stage of a sales process and how you can fill all the gaps in that to get more out of that. The next thing is feeding that into all those distribution channels. So you've got sales reps that need to use content to engage people who typically these days don't naturally want to engage with sales reps quite as regularly. So you need to have that to allow them to stay front of mind. You've got paid kind of performance marketing who are using content as the foundation of everything they do. You've got events, which is always kind of pivoted around a particular piece of content. Like what we want to do is understand how we can put our insight that right now is for the content marketing team into the workflows of those people so that we can start driving a more tangible ROI increase across all of the different elements of the marketing machine.
So given that, I would love to hear how the last 12 months have gone for you.
Yeah, but very big question. I haven't. You don't get a lot of chance. I think one thing starting a business and taking kind of venture money, you don't get a lot of chance to reflect on these things because you are very much just like it's always the next thing and the next problem, and you never get. It's rare that you get a chance to take stock and look back. So it'd be quite fun. I would say it's been a journey. So I think not long after we spoke, we raised some money, which was fantastic. So we raised a relatively small VC round from a VC here in the UK called Hatch. So obviously that just unlocked some amazing stuff for us in terms of like it gives you a little bit of credibility when you go into conversations, which I think is almost sad because it shouldn't, right? And it was a funny thing reflecting. It was like overnight, your business just changes a little bit in terms of how you're received. But your perspective on it doesn't, right? We had all of the same problems. In fact, we had a whole load more and a whole load more pressure as soon as that happened. But that certainly changed things a little bit in terms of external credibility, which is a funny thing because it is purely external, right? Nothing else has changed other than that money landing. But so that was a bit of a shift that happened in kind of Q2 last year. And then since then, it's been, in every element of the business, a journey. I don't quite know which direction to take it in. We've hired out our kind of in-house engineering team, brought on a couple of kind of contractors on the marketing side. So we're starting to see the organic marketing stuff that we're doing pay dividends and work. I think it's always Yeah, and then from a product perspective, a couple of little pivots along the way. Now focusing fully on the AI search space, which, if you remember what we were doing before, it was all about content marketing. So certainly adjacent, and a lot of the stuff that was in the product when we spoke, which I think would have just been launched about a month or two before, still in the product, but now part of a much larger suite of capabilities to help people influence what AI thinks of them, which is such a fun thing to spend every day thinking about. I absolutely love working in a space where no one knows what the hell they're doing, because it's it's a great leveler, because I can genuinely quite confidently say that I understand that as well as anyone. And it's like there's no one has a moat, right? It's all up for grabs. So if we can figure it out quicker than others, then it's going to be a good thing for us.
Wow, so much to unpack there. So tell us a little bit about the funding journey for you guys. You mentioned that you raised a little bit of funding. Tell us about that. How did you sort of find the right investors? Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, it was a whole year ago now, but I would say we got lucky in a sense, because we spoke to Hatch, and Hatch really, we felt they really reflected back what we want in an investor. They're very founder led, which I think is something everyone says, but a lot of very few investors actually kind of live out. But you could tell just from the way that they approached the conversation at every turn, they were asking sensible questions. They were pushing us, but pushing us kindly, right? Like there was one thing, and we'll be fundraising again before too long, or we're just starting to think about it now. There were different camps of investors. Some seem to really take pride in telling you all of the holes in your business, and it seemed to bring them joy. Hatch didn't take any joy in it, but they were pushing us to change the way that we were thinking and to kind of stress test the plans that we had, which is really interesting. So I felt like I learned over the course of the process with them, which was, I think, something that I would look out for if I was going through it again, is, do I constantly feel under pressure or feel like I'm being challenged for the sake of being challenged, or am I actually learning? Because if you're learning, then you're going to learn any interactions after, and that's been how it was borne out. But also, yeah, we were relatively lucky in that. And then more normally, you hear stories of like, oh, we had hundreds and hundreds of meetings before we finally found an investor. We didn't. We only really got into serious conversations with a few. And then felt like Hatch was a good fit for us, which was fantastic from the point of view of saving us from spending too much time on that side of the business. I've always been of the opinion that I want my primary job to be building this business for customers rather than for investors. So that was a very nice thing. But I guess in a way it's maybe not the most helpful story for other people out there, because I don't doubt that there is an element of luck in there, that we happened to find the right investor after a few meetings.
Amazing. I'm really glad that you did find the right investors. So you mentioned earlier that there was a huge shift externally on how you were seen. For you and James, not a huge amount had changed apart from some money in the bank for you to go out and do the things that you needed to do. But tell us about that external shift and how that impacted your kind of way forward.
Yeah, well, it's a shift in your expectations that you have on ourselves, right? So we suddenly have other people that we answer to in a way that we didn't before, and even the most founder-friendly investors, obviously, they have expectations that we've set and we need to deliver on. I think it was noticeable that you get a little uptick in industry because you get a small PR. Now it's only a small pre-seed round, right? But you get a little bit of a PR boost initially from the round, and with every round that you do, that I think gets amplified in terms of the impact that will have. You also, just as a startup, particularly in B2B and enterprise B2B, one of the biggest challenges you face is convincing people that you'll still be here a year from now or 2 years from now. No one wants to go out on a limb making a kind of important tech purchase without having that confidence. So just being able to say, look, we're venture backed, they can look at the round details and see that that's true. It helps you overcome some of the bigger objections that you face. So that was the kind of credibility side of what we were doing. From a practical perspective, obviously, it just unlocks a huge amount of flexibility in what you're able to do. As a founder, if you're able to pay yourself a small salary, it helps, right? You take one of those stresses away from yourself, or maybe not away from yourself, but you can diminish the kind of personal stress of just, do I pay my mortgage this month, right? That's an important thing, I think, eventually to get away from. If you're trying to build to a longer term vision, you have to be in a situation in yourself where you can have some element of longer term outlook and not thinking month to month. So that was I would say, one of the nicer changes for us personally. I think the way that Jeremy, who was our kind of main kind of champion at Hatch and the partner there, the way that he put it was, you get taking venture money gives you the freedom to experiment, right? So you can try things. And I would say over the last year or so, we have done an awful lot of stuff. The analogy, I don't know what the policy is on swear words on this podcast, so I will tell you that throwing crap at the wall is normally something that's seen as bad, but I think in the early stages is not a particularly bad thing to be doing, because you have to do a lot of stuff to start getting a sense of what sticks. And what we've landed on, it took us until now, I would say, to say that we have any kind of sustainable system for generating pipeline, cutting through a very noisy market. And what we've landed on is actually incredibly basic. Do really, really good original research into what we do, particularly in the AI search space, and just let that naturally cut through. So we're going to use facts to cut through, rather than any kind of marketing tactic. But in that time, we've tried everything under the sun to get what we do, which we have a huge amount of belief in front of people. And I think without the investment, you just can't do that with the same speed and the same kind of decisiveness. So I think we're now at the stage where it's time to stop throwing stuff at the wall and be like, no, this is our motion. This is what works. This is who we need to reach. This is what we need to say to them. But we've probably shortcut what would have been a couple of years of experimentation into a year, in order to get to that point, which I think it's the speed at which you can execute that is the big benefit, even to taking a smallish round that isn't like, okay, we're throwing money at this and building out a team of 20 engineers from day one.
So what would you say has been the most surprising experiment that you've run in terms of results?
Oh, good question. Surprising experiment that we've run. It's difficult because I think most of it has been learning what doesn't work, right? Like the way of these things is that very few of them worked. And I think that was something that I was finding very challenging towards the end of last year, certainly. Right. Well, if people don't seem to reply to cold emails, they don't pick up the phone. No one likes the person who's sliding into your DMs on LinkedIn. But it's like, well, at a point, like, how do I contact? and it's really hard. And it was feeling very much like everything was pay to play. And obviously, I know we're not raising some money, but still, the size of round that we raised as a pre-seed in the UK, competing with big US competitors, we're not winning a pay-to-play game. We'd have to find a way to be smarter and hackier than other people. So I think that was probably the biggest surprise. It was like, I came at this from enterprise sales, and I'm like, okay, if you give me a good product, then I can go out and I can sell that. And I think it was realizing that isn't the thing. That have changed there now. Everything is so noisy, and I think we're at the toughest end of that, right? Selling Martech to CMOs is a famously crowded space, but it's getting worse and worse because you have all of these kind of vibe coded tools that have flooded the market all of a sudden, and all of these technical or even non-technical entrepreneurs who are being very aggressive and when it comes to kind of volume of outbound and things like that. And it's just flooded so much noise in terms of the different products. In our category, we actually looked, there were 200 AEO tools on G2 about a month ago, 5 weeks ago. We looked at the end of last year, there were 250. At the end of last week, there were 250. So that was in about a month, another 50. And then we looked on Monday this week, and there have been another 7 over the weekend. So it's like the rate at which people are putting out tech, and therefore every one of those multiplies the number of messages in their inbox that someone that we need to talk to gets. It was just trying to pick through how to get through that has been the hardest thing. And it did catch me a bit off guard because I think it was the part that I thought, like, no, I know how to do that. I've been doing that to a reasonable standard for the last 5 years.
Interesting. And I think that's half the battle, though, is figuring out what doesn't work, because many people don't put the stock into the information that you can get from that, and how that can help your business. I think the funding definitely helps when you're trying to run those experiments. So in terms of the other things, you mentioned hiring, You mentioned that you've kind of built out an engineering team. Tell us about, the priorities in hiring and how you made sure that you got the right people, because as you know, recruitment is one of the hardest things that founders can deal with. And it's very easy to get it wrong. But when you get it right, it can make your business rather than break it.
Yeah, I was very lucky in a sense in that I was able to hire. So our founding engineer I'd worked with in the past, and he just happened to kind of become available at the right time for us. But even then, we went through a pretty diligent process. So I think if I was giving someone else advice for it based on my experience, it would be make sure that you go, even if you know someone, go through the diligence and get help for it, right? So we had a fractional CTO who we brought on, who had done a bit of advisory work with us initially, but we were like, look, we're going to hire someone. We want to make sure that we run this as a proper process. And he took them through tasks. And even though I had someone that I knew who I think I felt very comfortable with, I was very clear with them, look, I only want to hire you if I'm all in and feel fully confident that I can then stand behind that. So I want you to go through the process alongside other candidates that and go through a fair process still on that. And I wanted to take the advice of someone who really knows how to hire for that specific job role based on an impartial assessment. And then it ended up still coming out that that Kyron was the right hire, and he's been absolutely fantastic since. So I think the cliche is hire slow, fire fast, which I think is probably pretty accurate, because I also think you can probably tell pretty quickly if you've not got it right, and there's not really much benefit for anyone in dragging that out. So I think that was the critical part. I think the other thing that I've noticed just in speaking to some people, because you speak to people from different worlds when you hire people, and don't always go for the one with the most impressive CV. I think that there's stage fit is something which probably doesn't get talked about enough as much as role fit. So we are pre-seed. We are a small team. I actually want to stay a small team. I don't think there's any need to hire lots and lots of people these days, which we could get into. So I need someone who thrives on that kind of ownership, right? I think it's very easy to go and get blown away. We had people who we were talking to from Amazon and from Google, and it all sounds really cool, and it would have looked great. It would have made for probably a more headline grabbing, or it would have, or not a more, but a very headline grabbing kind of new signing announcement, that you can, and it looks great on a pitch deck. But if they're not excited to build something from the ground up, and they don't just have like that, there's an intangible thing of someone who is really energized by a startup. And it's obviously not, it doesn't make for great podcasting because it's intangible. So I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but you can get a sense of someone's energy when you speak to them. And I think listening to that like sense that you have of, are they just really excited to join here? Because startups are hard. It will not all be smooth, the story. And you need people who are still there when you go through a rocky patch and don't just kind of think, oh, okay, this isn't quite what it was cracked up to be, and go and jump ship.
Yeah. And I think there's a particular type of makeup and type of individual that thrives in that startup environment. It's not for everyone. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I agree with you that having the right stage experience, and I've always talked about the fact that for me it's always a journey. And if you think of it as a bus or a train, there's people that will join you at different platforms and different stations, and some that will get off sooner because they like that early stage part of the journey, and some that will go through the entire journey with you end to end. And there's others that will join later on in that journey. And I think that's how founders should embrace those individuals, because they bring different skills and experiences that you need along that entire journey. And so to your point, yeah, having, some heavy hitters from bigger organizations, there will probably come a time when those are the people that you want to hire, but making the decision not to hire them early on, I think, is the right thing to do.
Yeah, well, because also I think often they're very ingrained in a way of thinking, and they try to bring the play. Most people do it, but one of my biggest values is I want people who don't bring a playbook with the cheesy line that we use, playbook writers. What I don't want is people who say, this is what's worked for me in the past, come to Demand Genius, I'm going to implement that. Because the world moves on very quickly, and I think if all you're doing is things that have been done in the past, then we will be exactly as good as everyone else, and that's not what I want us to be. I want people who come in, engage, with the specific problems and shape of our business and build a playbook or build something drawing on experience around that. And I think that's something that I look for quite actively in a kind of interview process always is, are they excited to do that? Or does that just seem like a little bit too much?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us a bit more about the product. I know some people may not have heard your first episode. For those of us that have, but maybe haven't remembered to go back to listen to it, tell us what it is Demand Genius is all about. You've mentioned that you work with CMOs and particularly in the enterprise space, but what is it all about? What's the value of it? And how has that evolved in the last 12 months?
Yeah, so I think the simplest way to put it is we help B2B brands specifically show up in AI, or specifically influence what AI believes about them and believes about their category as a whole. So what's often, there's a lot of different acronyms flying about for it. It's probably the first time that our industry has ever failed to coalesce on an acronym. But we've got AEO, we've got GEO. Basically, how do we get ChatGPT to mention us and to mention us in the way that we want? And that second part, I think, is the really key bit. It's a little bit of a pivot. So initially we were focused on content marketing, which obviously is one very large part of how you get the AI to know who you are. But it is only one component, and that's where we've maybe not pivoted what we do, but certainly expanded what we do to be a full a kind of full solution from an AI search perspective. In terms of how brands do that, I think that's one of the fun parts, is that everyone is just figuring it out together. That's why I found that research is part of what we do. And I often, the way that I try to think of us as an organization is that we're a think tank that builds software sometimes, because I think our space will be won not by the team, not by the business with the most engineers, but by the business that does the best job of staying on top of how models change, best practices change, and unpicking what we can learn about those models. Kind of, you have to work to kind of retrofit how they work and understand how you can therefore influence them, run lots of experiments. What I think will help us is creating a really short feedback loop from that research to content and to product features, which is why I've put a lot of focus on that part of the business. Yeah, that's what we do. I'm not sure. I don't want to go too kind of technical into it, but I'm happy to if that's
No, it's good. That's really good to understand a bit more of that. And you know, we talked about your background in the last episode, so I'm not going to dig into that. But I am keen to hear, you know, a year on, you know, what your kind of view is on being a founder, and you know, in terms of that experience that you've had versus being in the corporate world as an employee.
I would say I mean, it's obviously very different. I've always worked in startups more so than corporates, with a brief stint at a bit more of a corporate business after last startup was sold. So I'm quite comfortable in that environment, but I think maybe I didn't realize how much you get shielded as an employee. I think maybe I thought I had a better understanding of what it meant to start a business than I actually did, which I think is something that one of my old kind of friends and mentors I spoke to the other week, and he was like, you now understand exactly what it's like as a founder. And people don't understand that unless they've done it. The kind of stress that you have, and it's like this constant nagging anxiety of something could be wrong, and normally it is, and you just have kind of learned to get comfortable with that. I think the way that I describe it to people is that it's a roller coaster, and particularly in the earlier days, but still now as well, even though we're a little bit more kind of established. And one day I'm an entrepreneur and the next day I'm unemployed, and you kind of oscillate pretty violently between those two things inside. And it's really hard, because you always have to keep up the profile of an entrepreneur externally, particularly when you're raising money and you're selling, right? You have to there has to be a little bit of that. I don't want to say fake it until you make it, but you have to kind of present the picture. But obviously there are days where that isn't what you're feeling internally. And I think that's probably the biggest gap between doing it as an employee and doing it as a founder. As an employee, you don't have those days. It doesn't hit, when you get a bit of negative feedback, it doesn't hit your self-worth and your personal confidence in quite the same way that it does when you're a founder. When you're a founder, your identity is so linked to that business and to its success that it just makes, I think, the emotional obstacles that you have to overcome day in and day out while keeping the positive outlook is the hardest bit, and is I think what my friend meant when he said that that's something you only really get once you've done it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are you most proudest of in the last 12 months?
I think kind of still being here. Um, I think yeah, it's cool building good products. We solve a problem that incredibly important to solve. We are doing great work for customers, and we've managed to build this now into something that is a much more kind of sustainable business. I think the proudest thing for me always is overcoming the personal hurdles that you encounter along the way, because I think anyone will tell you, and I've spent a lot of time either talking to or listening to people who have built much more successful businesses than us, but all of them say you don't see it in the PR glossy presentation, but there are dips, right? Most businesses, you have moments that feel pretty like intrinsically threatening, right? As in, if we don't do X in the next month, then we are not going to exist anymore. Now, I don't think we've quite had it. We haven't had any of those. But you have those deep dips, and it's very easy to quit during the think, or to just get yourself so down. And you do have periods where you're very down. And I think or at least I do. And I think the thing that I'm most proud of is coming through that to where I am now, and the fact that I didn't stop going during that, and also the people that I've managed to put around me as well. And it's cool to see other people. We're just at that stage now where, as the team starts to expand, more people are able to have autonomy, and I'm able to see how the fact that I did that is able to actually hopefully create this environment where lots of other people can feel a lot of that as well, and can feel a similar kind of flourishing and go on a similar journey within their own world. And that's one thing I try to create. Yes, I want people to feel like founders here as well, and to feel like they can suggest ideas for the whole business. They feel personally connected to its outcome. Hopefully I shield them from some of the stresses and some of the worries. And they're mine to bear, not theirs, but they feel the same level of ownership, at least in their sphere. And it's really cool at the moment, actually, to see other people, like the excitement on other people's faces when you tell them that you want to employ them and things like that. Right? It's cool when you see their heads churning away with all of these ideas of what they want to do with the product, or what they want to do with our go-to-market. I love seeing that, and I think that's one of the things I'm most excited to over the next few years, is to watch those people flourish, and hopefully bring more and more people along on that, and try to do that in a way which everyone gets the experience that probably these early folks are getting.
Brilliant. I think it speaks to your success, the fact that you've really worked on, your own confidence and resilience. That's really the marker of a great founder, is having that resilience to cope with the tough times, because it's not sunshine and rainbows all the time. And so if you can get through those difficult moments, your longevity and your chance of success is significantly higher. So it's amazing that you've worked through that. When we first spoke last year, we talked about our shared colleague James, who is your co-founder, your partner in crime, the guy that keeps you on the straight and narrow, I think, as you put it last year. How has that relationship flourished in the last 12 months?
He hates it when I introduce him on calls as my professional better half, so I'm going to do that a bit more public with it. James is a rock. I think you've worked with him in the past. He's a very steady man, and very dependable. One of the things I probably value most highly about him, he's one of those bit like, if you throw a problem at him, it just gets him going. He absolutely loves it. So if you send something that his way, you will probably within 15 minutes get back an answer of like, either I've solved it, or exactly this is what we need to do. And AI has kind of superpowered that for him, because he has someone to bounce that energy off of. So yeah, he's very dependable, and it's very nice to have someone to go through those emotional highs and lows, and also someone who's a bit more steady. He probably doesn't experience the roller coaster quite as much as me. He's a bit more steady, and you kind of need that, because at the bottom, I think you need, like, if you're having a difficult time, you need someone to be very aware that it's difficult, and to like bring that urgency to solving it. But you can't have the whole business suddenly fall into the pits. So I think it's a good fit, having someone who rides the up and downs a bit more, and someone who's a bit heady.
I love that. So tell us, Tom, what do you think is going to happen in the next 12 months? What would you like to see happen in the next 12 months for the business?
Yeah, it's such a hard. I think more than ever, it's really, really hard to do kind of projections and forecasting because the market just changes so quickly. Um, so I feel that when we're trying to answer that question, I think we are now at the point where I feel very secure in saying that we have the best product in the market for what we do, for our segment of it, which is kind of B2B businesses with complex sales cycles. I know who we're for. I know I can kind of stand up in front of them, and we're just starting to find a repeatable way to get into those situations and get in front of those people. So I think we're at that very kind of exciting point where we're just, I always, product market fit, I think, is a very dangerous thing to say, even at seed stage. I think historically that was something you saw at Series A, but I think we're kind of around about at that point now, and where I would expect over the next year is when it really starts to all go up a notch, and the challenge for us will be how we start to put processes in and things like that, and get slightly out of the scrappy mentality. So yeah, I think it's starting to go on that kind of, on that scaling journey, and that's going to be very interesting, and it will be very fun to see what that throws at us. I hesitate to put kind of specific outcomes on it because I think that's difficult, but I think we will. See us start to consistently deliver great outcomes for clients and do it in a way which is maybe a little bit less attached to me personally being hands-on in them, because we've actually built that into a process now.
So it's going to be an exciting 12 months. And I agree that unfortunately with the pace of the industry, you never know what's going to happen in the next 12 months, but I'm sure that you guys will continue your success, and I'm excited to watch you continue on with that. Would love to have you back a year from now, and get that update. And as part of this show, that's what we're doing, is following founder journeys from the beginning. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's always a fun chat, and nice to do a bit of reflecting, actually. So
Brilliant.
That's it for this episode of Tech Startup Stories. Have a story you'd like us to share, or a topic you'd want to cover? Reach out and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.